Cool. Looks like it's recording. All right. And it looks like it's going. Great. All right. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. Please keep your line muted. Obviously, during the presentation, we are going to have a Q&A session at the end of the call where you'll be able to unmute your line, ask your question, or alternatively, you can use the chat box as well, which is going to be monitored by Evan Farley and Leslie Black from our team. We do encourage engagement and participation, and we hope we can get to as many questions as possible. And again, the call is being recorded, so if anybody wants a copy of the call, just email any one of the WeFundLA team members or info@wefundla.net, and we'll send you a link so you can share with your clients, friends, families. So with that, welcome everybody to episode number 6 of the WeFundLA Community Roundtable. For those of you joining us for the first time, let me take a quick moment to properly introduce ourselves. My name is Daniel Arias. I am the WeFundLA team leader. And WeFundLA is a local group of mortgage professionals based here in SoCal, but specifically in the San Gabriel Valley and Northeast LA communities. Through our realtor and community partnerships, we've been able to serve our clients by assisting present and future homeowners with all of their mortgage-related needs. The original intent of this call was really to create a platform for our agent and real estate partners to share, collaborate, and discuss best practices as we're all attempting to figure out how to safely conduct business in the midst of the COVID pandemic. The weekly gathering quickly evolved into something really special, and it's now attended by a lot of people that are all searching for answers and solutions to both business and personal challenges. We've had the great privilege of hosting industry leaders, medical professionals, and now one of the country's leading authorities in child development. And our guest speaker today, Dr. Payne Bryson, is a New York Times bestselling author. She's been on Good Morning America, NPR, Time Magazine, just to name a few, and we're honored to have her on the call today. To help moderate today's call, we have one of our top loan originators and mother to Alessia, Mateo, and Mamba the Golden Doodle, Joanne Valverde. Tina and Joanne, welcome to the call.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I can attest personally that Daniel and your whole team are phenomenal. We've really enjoyed working with you personally. That's how we met, is you have done our mortgage, and you guys have been so responsive and awesome. So of course, I was happy to jump in, and what a wonderful thing you're doing for the community to bring people together and to give them some things to be enriched upon. And so I'm happy to be part of that.
Thanks so much for that plug. Didn't expect it, but thank you. We're going to call today's session Parenting During the Pandemic. As many of you are struggling to find that balance, and Tina's going to be walking us through developing new habits and best practices as we navigate to adapt to this new normal, or some would say abnormal. The WeFundLA team dedicates today's call to all of the parents out there doing an incredible job of not only keeping their children safe and healthy, but also providing the emotional support that's essential during these challenging times. I think my mom and dad are on the call today too, and I'm certainly grateful for everything they've done for me, and I look forward to that text message that my mom sends every single morning with a message of love and support. So Tina, for the probably one or two, or maybe everybody's familiar with you, but if anybody's not familiar with you, your work, and your collection of books, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your practice?
Yeah, so I am a mom to 3 boys, and I've been married for 26 years, literally 26 years. I know it sounds like one of those exaggerations, like I've been married a million years, but I have actually been married 26 years. I got married very young at 22, so I know you're doing the math. I'm 48, I'll just tell you. But I have a PhD in social work from USC, and my life's work is around something called interpersonal neurobiology, which really looks at how the brain and the mind and relationships all interact to shape who we are. And so professionally, I've written 4 books with a co-author. Some of you may know is kind of the rock star of the mental health world. His name is Dr. Dan Siegel. And so we've written several books, 4 books together. And then I have my first solo book coming out September 1st called The Bottom Line for Baby. And that's a very different kind of book, but it's a book for new parents or for parents of infants where you get such competing advice on topics, and it's basically done alphabetically, and you can flip to sleep training or whatever the topic is, and it lays out the competing arguments, what the science says, and then gives a bottom line for parents. So it makes it kind of quick form, science-based, intentional parenting. So I'm really excited about that as well. My main job is to speak. I write these books and I travel and I get to talk about the books. I usually am speaking to educators, parents, clinicians, and businesses. And for those of you who are not parents right now, everything I talk about is based on the science from interpersonal neurobiology, and it applies actually to all of our relationships. So you will all walk away with some things that'll be relevant to you. And then I have with my husband, I own a multidisciplinary clinical practice, and what that means is it's mental health, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, educational therapy, and neuropsychological assessment, so that when a person, a child, an adult, a couple is struggling, we can really have this multidisciplinary lens to peel back the layers to find out what's really going on and support people in the best way. So, and there just weren't other practices doing what I wanted to do and what I felt like the science was calling to be done for people's best interest. So I just decided to start one. So anyway, that's the majority of my work. So yeah, is that what you were looking for?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much for joining us today. So we all find ourselves wearing many hats these days, from being a parent, employee, teacher, cook, spouse, business owner, and entrepreneur. And our children, ranging from newborns, toddlers, to teenagers, are all requiring different types of emotional and physical support during this unprecedented time. How can we find that right balance as parents?
There's no such thing. That's the first thing we have to start with. So I just want to say to all of you, like, being a really great parent, that in and of itself is really hard to do. And being a perfect parent is impossible. Being really good at your job and taking care of all the household needs and taking care of yourself and all of the things that are required, particularly if you have young kids or kids who are trying to do school virtually who need support. What you are being asked to do is like 4 full-time jobs, and it is impossible to do all of them well. So that's the very first thing. And, you know, balance is such an interesting word. We talk about it a lot, but balance is kind of a precarious thing. Like if you get off it, you can get off balance really easily, and then you totally fall and everything falls apart. So it's really sort of what I would say to you all is, what you're being asked to do well in too many domains is impossible. So we just first want to accept that as reality and just say, you know, like one of the people that works with me said, you know, when my kids came home and they started doing school at home and I had to be there, I had to become a homeschooler also while I'm trying to work and take care of the needs of the household. She was like, I feel like I just got 2 more full-time jobs assigned to me that I didn't want and that I'm not getting paid for. So it's a lot for all of us. So it's really about getting clear on what's most important. And I would also say that even though we're like 7 or 8 weeks in, a lot of days it's just going to be triage. It's like, you know, that game Whack-A-Mole where you're like hitting whatever, like the mole pops up at Chuck E. Cheese. I hate Chuck E. Cheese, but you know what game I'm talking about. And some days are going to be like, how can I get through the day with the least amount of damage to all the people that live in this house, including myself? So now is the time to be really generous with ourselves. I will say this, that one of the things I see consistently when I work with kids, particularly in schools, is that when the demands of the situation and the child's capacity are too far apart, that gap there. So like if the demands of the situation, cognitively, emotionally, socially, and the child's capacity are a match, or the child's capacity exceeds the demands, the kids do pretty well. But if the demands are so much higher than what the child's capacity is, that gap there is called toxic stress. We have positive stress that kind of gets us up in the morning and says, oh yeah, I've got to get some things done today. That's a good thing for all of us. Then there's tolerable stress. Stress is tolerable when it doesn't last too long or it's not too intense. And tolerable stress can be good for us as long as we also have the perspective that says, okay, these stressful feelings I'm having actually can motivate me to get things done, and they tell me what's important. And so as long as we have a mindset around that that's positive, tolerable stress can be good for us. Toxic stress is where we never get a break from it, or it lasts too long, or it's too intense. And that can actually ultimately be traumatic for some people. When there's too big of a gap between what's demanded of us and what we're capable of, that can be toxic stress. So typically when I do problem solving around that, when it comes to a kid, is I say, okay, how can we decrease the demands of the environment? And how can we build the child's capacity? And it's typically doing both. So that's one way to think about what's happening just in terms of the demands in your life. What are some of the demands I can reduce? Maybe you order pizza 3 nights a week. Maybe you let your kids watch a lot more television. Maybe you sleep instead of doing some project you wanted to do. So thinking about ways you can decrease the demands on you. And then ways you can increase your capacity. And we know that ways we can increase our capacity are through the things we know we're supposed to do: sleep, good nutrition, exercise, mindfulness, or getting outside in nature, things like that. So just be thinking about your own self-care is such an important part of this. And I'll just say one other thing about that, and that is that children mirror our states, not just children, but the other people you live with, your significant others, siblings, whatever, depending on who you're living with, roommates. And so one of the most important things we can do to make sure our kids aren't super stressed out and reactive and really difficult to be with is to not be super stressed out and reactive and really difficult to be with ourselves. So we really have to start with keeping ourselves regulated. If we're anxious and angry and super stressed out, our kids are going to feel that way too. And I don't say that to add more pressure to you, but just to say, taking care of ourselves and doing what we need to do, and we can talk about some ways to do that, are crucial. They're not selfish. In fact, it's actually really important for our kids. So.
Thank you. My goodness, that is refreshing to know that there really is no balance. I think that a lot of people will resonate with that. So this will tie in with that first question a bit, but in a time where many of us are being tested daily and putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to be a better parent and a better teacher, all meanwhile our children are learning to navigate through this new norm of homeschooling, social distancing, lots of virtual learning, from the toddlers are no longer able to do their extracurricular activities, dance, art, soccer, and our older kids are, as you mentioned, your children are in school from 8 to 3:30 online. What are some healthy practices that you could provide to our listeners that would help support themselves as well as their children? And to add to that, I also feel that as parents, we're constantly focused on our kids, and sometimes we forget that we as parents need to focus and nurture ourselves as well.
Totally. And let me start with that. Parents, you matter too. You matter too. And really, it's important to even model for your kids that you need to take care of yourselves. And sometimes that even looks like, I'm too mad to talk to you in a way that I think is going to be helpful. I'm going to go calm down first before I come and talk to you. That even models really good self-regulation. So yeah, you matter too, parents. And so that's just really, really important. So yeah, in terms of all of what's happening at home for kids, and I'm seeing some questions coming up about screen time being used too much and all of these things, a couple of things that can be really helpful. One is, and I'm a big fan of a guy named Andrew Huberman, and it's Huberman, and his Instagram account is Huberman Labs, and he's a Stanford neuroscientist, and he particularly specializes in the visual system. And he's got all these, I just listened to a thing he did the other night where he was talking about what was being called a digital concussion, where basically people are spending so much time on screens that their pupils are actually constricting, and they are, and then stress dilates our pupils, and that this contrast and all of the things that are happening in terms of screen and visual input are actually creating things that are similar to concussions: dizziness, cognitive fog, headaches, things like this. And he has this great solution that I think is so important for all of us and for our kids as well. And that is to make sure that we have times where we are not doing focal attention, like on our screens or even books or things like that, but where we have the capacity to have a softer, more panoramic view, where we're taking in, things where we're looking at far away. So going outside and just looking down the street, looking out of a window, things like that can be really, really helpful. So Joanne, what was the first part of your question about kids and were you just wanting some strategies for getting through the day?
Yes, well, and exactly. Just as you mentioned, right now, children are having to, be online more, the social distancing part, they're not getting that social interaction that they would be in school as toddlers or even older kids.
Yeah. So I get this question a lot right now, particularly with infants, toddlers, and preschoolers, and parents being really concerned about socialization, that they're worried that just socializing with parents and siblings, or if they're an only child, that's going to damage them somehow socially. And the truth is that this is just for a period of time. I know it feels like forever, and it is a long time in terms of a child's development when you're talking about a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old. But the most important part of an infant, toddler, and preschooler socialization is their interactions with their parents, being washed in language, being talked to, being interacted with, helping activate curiosity in the world, like going outside and playing I Spy, or saying, wow, did you see that big leaf that fell? Those kinds of things. So know that, yes, socialization with other kids is really important, and they will get that. So you can really sort of just let that fear go by. There's nothing you can really do about it, and you are the most important part in terms of their socialization. Now, when they're not getting their other activities, that places a little bit more, burden on the parents to figure out how to fill the day. And I remember when my boys were little, and I see our neighbors who have really little kids are out walking, and I just see I look across the street and the little 2-year-old is just laying on top of this rock that's out across the street. And, the mom's just standing there waiting for him to just get tired of that, because she's just trying to fill the minutes. And if he's going to lay on a rock for 3 minutes, that's 3 minutes where he's happy, and the day is, that's something else that's happening. And it's really one of the most beautiful parts of early childhood is sometimes they want to just sit on a step because it's fun to sit on a step. And to just really be, they're really present to what's happening in the moment. So it does put a little bit more pressure on us as parents to make sure their day is, has activities of enrichment, but it is not necessary. And it's even intrusive when we feel like we have to entertain or fill every moment of our child's life with enrichment and language. We want to do that, but we don't need to do it all day long. So it's fine to let kids meander around, and it's fine to let them have some screen time, and to not feel like you have to be the source of their entertainment. One just really quick suggestion for those of you who have really littles who have a hard time playing by themselves and you need a few minutes to get something done is to set up a world. And what I mean by that is you basically find a towel, find whatever's in your room, find a towel, put a blue towel down on the floor and tie a rope to a doorknob, and then tie the other part of it to a castle or a ship or a truck or whatever toy you have, and find a superhero guy. You can tell I have 3 boys who loved all this kind of stuff. I'm sure lots of girls like it too. I don't mean to gender typify, but my boys, I tried to give them baby dolls and things like that, and they use them as weapons. So all of my examples are going to be with superheroes. I was like, oh, look at the sweet baby. And they're smacking it on the wall. But to have some action figures or stuffed animals hanging on the wire and say, oh, they're trying to cross you say to the kid, oh, look, the guy is trying to cross the ocean. How is he going to do it? How is he going to get across? And then you just sort of leave and allow your kid, you supervise them so they don't choke themselves on the rope. Obviously, always want to make sure they're safe. I have to give that disclaimer. But it might allow you to have 10 or 15 minutes where they're playing imaginatively. So you're actually supporting imaginative play and letting them figure out ways to entertain themselves. And so there are ways we might have to be creative and we might have to come up with some ideas. But honestly, what our kids really need most from us is really our presence. And we can't do that all day long, but we can do it in bits and spurts where we're playing with them, we're engaging with them, we're following their lead, and then we're supporting them to engage in something themselves with imaginative play as well, and supporting that ability for them to entertain themselves.
Perfect, thank you. So I wanted to talk about the 4 S's that you mentioned in the Full Brainchild: safe, seen, soothed, and secure. I feel now more than ever, this is something that many of us need or should apply in our parenting. Could you help elaborate on the 4 S's that help promote secure attachment with our children?
Yes, this is, okay, so Dan and I had a book that came out in January called The Power of Showing Up: How Parental Presence Shapes Our Child's Minds and Develops Their Brains. I don't actually know the subtitle of any of my other books, but I know that one because not only is it most recent, but I think that is exactly what I want to talk about now. And it's so important. Regardless, again, this part is super relevant to all of our relationships. Okay, here it is. As mammals, we all have, so Daniel, this applies to your little dog. As mammals, we all have this inborn instinct called attachment. And what I'm about to talk about is not the same thing as attachment parenting. I'm talking about something that is actually 50 years of cross-cultural research that shows that one of the best predictors for how well any mammal, but particularly I'm going to talk about kids, turn out is that they've had what's called secure attachment with at least one person. And what that means is that not perfectly, but enough predictable times, a child has an experience where when they have a need, someone sees the need and responds to it in a sensitive and predictable way. So what that means is that, well, Dan and I, my co-author and I, have come up with the 4 S's to say, what does secure attachment look like? So before I go into that, I want to say this really important thing, which is, we now know that experiences that we have don't just influence our minds and our characters and our behaviors, but the actual architecture of how our brains get wired. And the most important experience when it comes to all of our experiences for how our brains get wired are our relational experiences, particularly in our childhood. So what that means is that as we respond to our children, particularly when they are having a need, we are influencing how their brain is getting wired. So no pressure or anything, right? So what this means is that what we can do to facilitate secure attachment, which is what helps build the brain in the most optimal ways, including that prefrontal cortex where all of the executive function and the ability to regulate emotions and make sound decisions and be mindful and be empathetic and insightful and good problem solvers, like all of that social and emotional intelligence stuff that allows us to be successful, is all impacted by these relational experiences. So if providing secure attachment is pretty much the most important thing we can do for our children, and actually in all of our relationships, what can we do to cultivate it? And that's where the 4 S's come in. The 4 S's are safe, seen, soothed, and secure. So let me just talk about what that means briefly. Safe is helping our child, and you can just say the other person in a relationship if you don't have children. Safe is about protecting them from harm. But it's also about not being the source of their fear and their threat and their harm. So I know obviously that would mean abuse and neglect, but it would also mean things like being really unpredictable where we scream and yell, or fighting with the child's other parent in a way that's destructive and really stressful for the kids. In fact, there are studies that show that even if an infant is asleep, so not consciously aware of what's happening, that the parents are disrespectfully or aggressively arguing in the background, that baby's stress hormones, cortisol, are elevated. So that just goes to show that, children really take in what's happening in their environment. And we should be really focused, particularly now, on not being the source of our child's stress and distress, but rather being a safe haven. So thinking about you as a person and the environment of your home as like a safe harbor. So there's a lot of storm happening out in the world, and sometimes it's like, my brother was mean to me and that was really hard on me and I'm so upset and I'm angry, and they need us to say, I've got you, you're okay, we'll figure this out together. So you become that safe haven for something little like that. But it can also be something big like a frightening global pandemic, that we become that safe harbor for them and that we are not contributing to their fear and threat. And one of the best ways we can do that specifically right now during the coronavirus is to make sure that the language we're using to explain this to our children or to help support them when they're upset about not seeing friends or not getting to go to their special class that they love or not getting to go to school, is by making sure that the language we're using is safety-based instead of threat-based. Keeping in mind that what fires together wires together, the brain is an association machine. So when we have, especially for weeks and weeks and weeks, when we're thinking about neuroplasticity or how the brain changes from experiences, if we're giving a lot of threat messaging, so we say to our kids, you can't play with your friends because it's not safe. You have to wash your hands. If you don't, it's dangerous. And if we're giving a lot of threat and you can't go to school because it's dangerous there, it's not safe, you could get sick, you could get other people sick. If that's what our attention is going to constantly, what we're doing is we're actually creating neural associations between going to the playground, being with friends, going to school, going to the store, all of those things, and danger and threat. So my concern is that at the end of this, when we have the freedoms for our children to go back out into the world and do typical things, that there will be a lot of fear and anxiety associated with that, because they've had all these repeated experiences of threat messaging connected to those activities and things. So one of the ways we can actually we can take control of this is to say, we're taking a break from seeing friends because it's keeping us safe. We're washing our hands before we eat and after we touch things because it helps keep our bodies safer. So we're saying those same messages, but we're focusing on safety so that your child doesn't come out of this with, gosh, the world is a dangerous place, but instead they come out of this as like, my parent keeps me safe. So if they're telling me it's okay to go back to school or it's okay to go see my friends or go to the playground, I can trust them. So we really always want to be focusing on safety. And the second takeaway on that, safe, is that you are going to be unpredictable. You are going to yell at your kids. We are all in a more reactive state right now, and that's to be expected. It's not, we are in an uncertain, volatile time that is threatening. And so, of course, we feel reactive inside of ourselves. We feel afraid and reactive, and we feel like we can't control things. We may be concerned about money. We may be concerned about health and family members. Some of you may be grieving losses. There's a lot happening, and that will impact how we feel and how we respond. And to say that like you shouldn't show any emotions or you shouldn't feel any of those things is not healthy. In our society, we've really pathologized negative feelings like fear and anxiety and feeling sad and depressed. Those are healthy human emotions. We don't want to get stuck in them, but it's okay to feel and sit in those and to learn how to tolerate negative feelings. And this is a little bit of a side note, but if we can't learn and sit with our own negative feelings and just go, gosh, I'm feeling really anxious right now, or gosh, I'm feeling really sad or angry right now, and that's just how I feel right now, and I know feelings come and go, and I'm going to let myself feel that for a few moments, and then I'm going to say, okay, like I'm noticing I'm feeling that, now what? Now what can I do? Then we're getting really good practice, because as a society, we often are not very good as parents at tolerating our children's negative emotions. So when they're disappointed or angry or sad, we feel like we have to rush in and fix it. But the problem is, the way we develop resilience is by practicing dealing with difficult things and sitting in difficult things and difficult emotions, but with enough support. So we can actually give our kids empathy, and we'll talk about this in a moment, and say, it's, you feel really disappointed right now, and I'm right here with you. It doesn't mean you fix what they're disappointed about, but you're just present to it. Okay, so you will feel big feelings and be really reactive right now, and you will mess up all the time with your kids. global pandemic or not, but especially right now. I share personally in my book, No Drama Discipline, a story about a time I threatened to remove one of my children's body parts. My son stuck his tongue out at me, and I told him if he did it one more time, I was going to rip it out of his mouth. I also have another story that my family refers to as the Yahtzee incident, because I got so mad I threw the dice across the room, when we were playing Yahtzee. These are all things that we will do as parents, but don't worry, this does not mean that you are totally undermining your child's first S of safety and feeling that you are a safe person, as long as you repair. So you have a rupture in the relationship, you repair it. You go to your kids and you say, oh man, I did not handle that well. I got so mad and I took it out on you and I yelled, and I bet that was really not fun and maybe even a little scary. I am so sorry. Will you forgive me? And you go and you make it right. And when you repair and make it right, you messing up is actually beneficial for your child, because it allows them to imagine if you were like perfect and lovely all the time in relationship with them. They, whenever they had conflict in another relationship, it would be really overwhelming and terrifying. So you're actually kind of expanding their window of tolerance for conflict in relationships, where they know, gosh, things get messy and icky sometimes, but then we make things right. So that's another takeaway for us. I know I spent a lot of time on that because it's the most important. We have to start with helping our kids feel safe, not contributing to their sense of fear, being that safe haven they can come to. The second one is seen. This one's really hard to do sometimes, because as a society, and I wrote a whole book on this called No Drama Discipline, we tend to focus so much on the behavior and we forget about the mind behind the behavior. So seen is about where someone really gets you. And so that's where you really tune into what your child's internal experience is, even if it seems ridiculous to you. So I remember a time one of my sons cried for 15 minutes about not being able to walk up the walls like Spider-Man, like not something I could do anything about, but he was just devastated he couldn't do that. And so seen, like if I'm not doing seen, I can say, well, that's silly. Like no one can walk up the walls. Like, I'm sorry, I can't do anything about that. It's not a terrible parental response, but so much better to say, oh, you're so disappointed. That would be so fun. You really want to do that. Wouldn't that be great if you could do that? And you really just tune into what their internal experience is. So that's a really important part of cultivating secure attachment, is tuning into the mind behind the behavior, what's really happening inside for them. The third one is soothed, and that's where we really are helping them. When kids are physically hurt or sick, it's much easier to be nurturing and empathetic and to show up for them in that moment and soothe them. But when they are emotionally hurting and it looks like really obnoxious behavior, it's so much harder to do that. But here's the thing. At your children's worst, that's when they need you the most. The worst behaviors, where they are out of control and screaming and kicking, and you're like, I don't like you right now. I can't stand being around you right now. That is when they need us the most. That's what the whole attachment system is set up for. So again, back to this idea of this inborn mammal instinct. If you're a little, bear cub in the forest and you see a predator or you get hurt, you're afraid. Your biological instinct is to go to your parent to help you survive. That's the purpose of the attachment system. So the attachment system gets activated most, and most needs connection and feeling safe, seen, soothed, and secure when we are in distress. And for kids, that often looks like pretty obnoxious behavior. It's also much easier to comfort children when they're crying, or they're like, kind of like pulling into like a sadder place or that kind of thing. When they're acting out and it's more like aggressive behavior, or aggressive verbal attacks on you, things like that, it's much harder to do that. But what we really want to do is to see those behaviors as a child being overwhelmed with stress hormones running through their whole body and actually really needing help. It's very stressful and unpleasant for them. And they're basically saying, I'm not handling this very well. So how do we do that, though, without being permissive as parents? Because I know some of you are going, yeah, but if their behavior's bad, why would I hug them and soothe them and help them? And by the way, soothing is really, sometimes it's about, do you need a hug? It might be about meeting physical needs, like, let me bring you a little drink of water. It might mean just sitting with teenagers and saying, I can tell you're having a really hard time. I'm here if you need me. That's it. Sometimes it's not even saying anything. It's just being present and being available so that they feel that you're there with them. So I want to give a quick example. First of all, boundaries and limits, back to this permissive thing, help kids feel safe. So this, what I'm talking about safe, seen, and soothed, is not about indulgent, permissive parenting. So a time when my son was about 5, he was having a total meltdown about getting out of the bathtub. And so the first thing I had to do was to make sure I was a safe person. So I had to do something to calm myself down, because when our kids are having tantrums and acting crazy and awful, it's contagious. And so it activates those states in us. So the first thing we have to do is to take a deep breath. And by the way, if your exhale is longer than your inhale, so if you inhale maybe for a count of 4 or 5 and you exhale for a count of 7 or 8, and you do that 2 or 3 times, it actually down regulates or turns the volume down on your nervous system arousal. So that's something you can teach your kids, but it's something you can do for yourself. Also, if you just try this with me now, if you can, put a hand on your chest and a hand on your abdomen, like right below your belly button, and just sort of notice how that feels. Now switch your hands and notice how that feels. About 90% of you will prefer your right hand on top. So just find the one that just feels better to you. Some of you won't feel a difference, but most of you will feel a preference for a right hand on top. And just notice that that feels really soothing and grounding. So if you do that and take a deep breath before you yell at your kids, it'll actually help calm down. And if you do it enough times, your kids will also recognize that that is the sign for mom or dad is about to go crazy. So it can become like a warning for them, but it also soothes us. So anyway, my son was raging, like, I'm not getting out of the bathtub. So I say to him, it's time to get out, and you can either get out or I will help you out. So he decides not to get out. And as I'm lifting his body out of the tub, I'm practicing seen and soothed. And I'm saying, you're so mad that bath time is over. You really wanted to stay in, and you're so sad and disappointed and mad about it. So then he goes, yeah, like his internal experience and my response are a match. Instead of me saying, look, you knew bath time was going to be over. I gave you warnings. If you're going to do this, then we're not going to be able to read a story tonight, right? So that's typically like kind of the path we go. But instead, we meet him where he's at emotionally, where he feels understood, so that over time his brain gets repetition and practice so that he can understand himself and his own internal states and have language connected to it. So I can say, you're so mad about bath time being over. And then I wrap the towel around him, and here's the soothed part. I say, if you need to cry for a little while or yell, that's okay. You can do that. And I'm right here with you. Do you need a hug? So this is allowing him to feel big feelings. I'm not saying, okay, fine, you can stay in the bathtub. I'm still enforcing a boundary and a limit, but he's feeling safe, seen, and soothed. And here's the last S of secure. It's not really about self-esteem, like I feel secure in myself, but rather it's the idea that if I don't have perfect, but I have enough repeated experiences of in my relationship feeling safe, seen, and soothed, then my brain wires to have what's called secure attachment. And what happens is that the brain wires so that they can know, first of all, if I have a need, if things are not working for me, if I'm upset, if the world is falling apart, or I have a splinter and I'm upset, or anything in between, someone will see that I need something and show up for me. And they come to know that and believe it, so they expect that in their relationships. So they have healthier relationships throughout their lifespan. But something even more important happens. And that is when they have enough repeated experiences of feeling safe, seen, and soothed. Again, not perfect, and you make the repairs when you have ruptures there. They learn how to show up for themselves. Their brain wires so that they can keep themselves safe. They can see and understand themselves. They can soothe themselves. And then they can show up for other people. So here's the bottom line of everything related to a global pandemic or not. What your kids need most from you is you. Imperfect, flawed, but present you. And being present is not just about being physically present. It's really about showing up in the moment. And so this is where it's so hopeful for us, even right now, when we're trying to do all of these things, is that it doesn't really necessarily mean quantity of time. But if you spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes, really present, where you're not distracted, you're not trying to just manage them. I feel like lots of times when I'm not present, I'm trying to get things done and I'm just managing my kids and I'm like, and I have teenagers, but I'm like, but I'm not really listening. If I instead close my computer and I make eye contact and I have a conversation with them for 5 minutes, I've kind of filled up their tank and they know that they're important to me, and then I can get back to my work. So this is where the idea of really being present and showing up in the moment, even if it's just for small moments throughout the day, will really make a big difference for your kids in terms of how they experience the days with you.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for touching on repairing and recovering from a strong disciplinary reaction. I know as a young rambunctious child, I was on the receiving end of lots of discipline, and my abuelita would come running after me with the chancla. All the Latino families know what a chancla is, but I think we all have lower tolerance levels right now, right? We're under more stress than normal. We may have more stronger reactions to our children if they're, misbehaving. And it's really good to hear that you can go back, recover from it, admit that maybe you had that strong reaction and that you're going to do better on the next time. So thanks for sharing that with everybody. I'm sure that's something everybody wanted to hear about.
It's really important. And you can go back and repair, not just when you yell, but even like later, if you go, oh gosh, sometimes when kids complain about things, one of the ways we mess up on the scene is we can say, well, you should be lucky that you have online school all day. Some kids don't even have a computer. Or we say, we respond to them in those kind of moments when they're sharing with us that they're upset about something or they don't like something. And if we respond to our kids with criticism or in ways that don't feel good to them, then what happens repeatedly is they go, okay, it doesn't feel good when I share what I think and feel with my parents, so I'm not going to do that anymore. So if you are worried that your kid is spoiled and indulged, that is, and this is a whole other talk, but behavior is communication about what skills need to be learned. So you go, okay, I need to have a conversation with my child and do some skill building around gratitude and around some perspective. But right now in the moment when my kid's like, I'm so mad I didn't get popcorn, or I hate, having to do school online, we can practice that scene by saying, it's really hard, it's not fun, is it? Or you're really disappointed I said no about not getting popcorn. And we can even repair with that. So later if we go, oh gosh, I just totally gave them a lecture and criticized them for what they were feeling, we can go back and go, hey, you were telling me that something was, that you weren't enjoying that, and I didn't listen very well. I'm sorry I missed that. And we can always go back and make repairs like that.
That's huge, I think, for a lot of parents to know that there is a repair after something like that is done. It's a learning opportunity. You touched on a point that I think hits home for a lot of people in regards to quality over quantity in terms of attention, right? A lot of people on this call are working from home, trying to find a way to conduct their business with a full house, which could be extremely challenging. And being a working parent, you're not used to all day distractions of children needing your attention. But as you mentioned, those small, even if it's 5 minutes, can make a big difference. How do you manage not deflecting your frustration with pressure of work onto them, but still promote loving and encouraging support? And what are your best work from home practices that you could suggest for others to implement while still being a supportive parent?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that is not only resilience building, but it's stress relieving and behavior regulating is play. And I don't mean just kids, I mean for all of us. What our kids really, really need right now, and what we really, really need right now, is playful moments. So silliness, goofiness, physical play, like getting down and like wrestling with your kids. If you have teenagers, they don't want you to do that with them. But even like cooking together, we've got a ping pong table set up. We're playing ping pong a ton with our kids right now. spending 5-10 minutes doing that. But just really like silliness, watching really funny videos on YouTube with your teenagers, whatever, but laughing together and finding moments of shared delight and joy and laughter. And just like crying and screaming releases nervous system arousal, laughter does too. So just finding ways and moments to do that. In terms of working from home, it so depends in terms of the strategies. It so depends on individual kids, the age that they're at, how introverted they are there other siblings in the house? There's so many factors that I don't know that I can come up with something that will be, really helpful for everyone. Besides, I know play is essential. I know really giving them your undivided attention in chunks, like 5-10 minutes of really kind of filling their tanks is good for everyone. But I would say in terms of all of us, as best I can, given sort of the individuality and unique differences across our situations, is that we have got to adjust our expectations for what we can accomplish with kids at home. And I know that what the science says and what my own personal experience is, what always leads to a lose for my work, lose for me, and lose for my kids is when I try to just manage them all day and put them off and put them off and put them off so I can get my stuff done. It's not quality work. I feel horrible and stressed, and I feel really annoyed by them interfering with what I'm trying to do. And they feel rejected and frustrated, and their needs are not getting met. So we may have to chunk our time up to say, okay, so I'm going to only be able to work in 15-minute spurts. And if you don't have help with your kids, if you have a partner where you can trade off chunks of time, is spending some of your work, may be spending an extra 10 minutes at bedtime reading and cuddling and snuggling or laughing and playing, so that you can then work after that. So I would say, think about like, okay, I'm going to spend 10 or 15 minutes really engaged with my kid, and then, or help them get set up with something, and then I'm going to work in a small chunk. So I think the most important thing is adjusting our expectations and then experimenting with different sort of patterns, and every day is going to be different. Some kids have more needs some days than others, but really trying to come up with some experiments around how to chunk the day in a predictable way that gives you at least a chunk of time where you can be productive and do what you need to do. I know that if we have an expectation for something, like I'm going to get a lot of work done today, it's the expectation that can set us up for so much frustration. And there may be stuff you just have to do. But I think, and I'm seeing a comment over here about lunch and dinner together and having, community and connection time. That's so key, because you have those moments where you're kind of filling their tank, so you can do that, and finding rituals to do that. Also, just again, you're gonna have to be creative problem solvers. I sometimes tell parents that the best way to get cooperation from kids is to be playful and creative. And then I have parents who say, I don't want to do an effing puppet show to get my kid to put his shoes on. Like, I don't want to have to do that. Just put your damn shoes on, And I so get that. But typically the amount of time and energy we spend in the battle is so much more demanding than if we become playful, like, oh, I'm so glad you're not going to put your shoes on because I'm wearing your shoes today. And then they run over and put them on. So you can, again, just trying to be as silly and creative and playful, which is, I know, really hard to do when we're under threat and stress, because it's hard to access the parts of our brain that do that. But having, if you have a little one, be like, are you ready to go to work? You have an important job, and you have them sitting next to you doing a job too. And whether the job is putting lids on things or making a picture for grandma or whatever it is, but giving them meaningful work while you're doing it. It might only be a few minutes, but that's at least a way to engage them in what's going on. But it takes adjusting expectations. And then the second thing is, really, instead of just being in that whack-a-mole mode, is to do a little bit of proactive thinking, like, okay, I need a chunk of time today. I'm going to do a 30-minute Magic School Bus episode, and then I'm going to have them sitting next to me making something for grandma, and then I'm going to have them make a huge mess that I know I'm going to have to clean up. by putting a big bucket of flour and water and food coloring and see what happens, you know? So you just come up with 3 or 4 things that at least give you a chance to have those breaks, but being proactive and coming up with things versus just all day managing and putting them off and putting them off and putting them off, that is going to just lead to more and more behavioral problems and more stress and frustration for you too.
Awesome. Hey, Tina, we're coming up here close to the hour mark, and I know that you've got other calls to attend to. If it's okay, maybe we can take 1 or 2 questions that I think came in through the chat box from Leslie or Evan.
There's one particular to parents being home together with their child, a preschooler from Laura Baxter. I thought it was a good question. So she stated, I'm my preschooler's preferred parent. In order for my self-care, sanity, regulation, and not being in a stressed, snappy mood, I need my spouse to take over on some things, but my kiddo still really wants me and goes full downstairs brain. I'm torn between my attachment theory brain that tells me to be sensitive and responsive, especially when she's losing it. And a part of me fears taking back over is reinforcing me as the favorite, taking away chance for them to bond and teaching her that she can always demand for me to do things. What would you suggest?
That is such a relevant question for all. I mean, it's such a typical thing for kids to have a preferred parent. It switches back and forth, so the other parent should not take it personally. And it sounds like you'd rather not be the preferred parent right now, at least for breaks. And that's a normal experience too. I would say that, and I love your reference to the downstairs brain. That means you're a whole brain child reader, and I appreciate that. I would say that if your child wants you and you want to connect in that moment, or you feel like you can do it without it feeling stressful to you, great, do it. But if you are done, or you need to get something done and you need a break, it is so much better for your child to be with the other parent than to be with you stressed and angry and resentful. And it's okay for your child to be sad and upset and want you, and for the other parent to comfort them and be with them while they feel those disappointing feelings, right? So that's, again, a resilience building kind of thing. So I would say, when your child's like, no, I want mommy, and screaming and yelling, the other parent can say, let's go outside and hunt for birds, or let's go find a flower for mom, or something like that. And it's okay if your child cries and is upset for a little while. They're in loving arms, they're safe, and they can start doing silly things, even doing things for you that help them tolerate that feeling. But it's totally okay to not have to be the one all the time. And especially if it's leading to resentment, it's totally okay. You're not damaging your child's attachment to you or anything. And it's good for your child and the other parent to have those moments as well.
Excellent. Any other questions in the chat box?
I want to say one more thing that I'm seeing coming up on the side here about how grandparents can help parents. And this is really just a message for all of us. For us to be able to show up for our kids or for our spouses or whoever, we've got to show up for ourselves and have other people who show up for us. So grandparents, help your kids feel safe, seen, and soothed, so they can be that for their kids. And you can, really making sure that you have people who help you feel safe, seen, and soothed is really important as well.
That was the question I was going to ask. So glad you addressed it. I see another pretty good one. How to support families once school starts, expectations, right? Because our now children have gotten used to this environment for however long that it's been. So how do you kind of reverse that out?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be a big experiment. I mean, for a lot of us, I'm rarely going out. And I had to go out yesterday to go pick something up at my office, and just driving felt weird to me. All of us are going to require some transition back, and like having to wear pants that don't have elastic waist, like that might be like, we all might need occupational therapy to tolerate that sensory input. But it probably will be really exciting for our kids. Some of them will be really excited about it and be overwhelmed by it, or they might be really tentative about it, especially depending on if they've been swimming in a soup of threat and fear information. So what our kids are going to need a lot of is sort of like when they're babies, and you kind of warm them up to things, or you titrate up. So they may need, even older kids like 3rd and 4th, 5th graders, when they get home from school, they might need like rocking or snuggling on the couch and reading a book, or some quieter kind of connecting time. So every kid's going to be different. A lot of kids are actually thriving better at home right now because they're less stressed from an overscheduled life, or they were really having trouble accessing the pace of school if they have a slower processing speed or attentional challenges. So for some kids, being at home, it has been working better for them. And so we're going to deal with some big emotions and behaviors as school comes back. And this again takes us back to the 4 S's, because there are going to be lots of times as parents, we don't know what to say or to do, but the 4 S's can always be your North Star. What do you do in the moment when your child's falling apart? What do you do in the moment when you're worried about them? What do you do when they're overwhelmed when school starts again? You show up for them. You help them feel safe, seen, and soothed in that moment. That's what you always do. So that's always something that's kind of like an anchor for us. But yes, it's going to be an adjustment. And again, adjusting our expectations, knowing our kids are going to be overwhelmed, which means they're going to be more difficult, which means they need us to show up even more for them.
Excellent. Tina, where can people find out more about you and your practice?
My website is tinabryson.com. And there's tons of like podcasts I've been on, tons of videos, so just tons and tons of free content for you if you want to learn more. And if you're interested more in the clinical practice, that website is thecenterforconnection.org.
Excellent. We'll post that into the chat box. And again, if anybody wants a recording of the call, please email info@wefundla.com. Tina, thank you so much for being on the call today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. And just another quick thing, I'm just seeing our Director of Communications, Ayla, has just posted something important, that if you guys want parenting support on Wednesday and Friday mornings, we do have a drop-in virtual parenting support group with questions, and it's donation-based. So if you can't pay, you don't have to pay, but if you want to put $10, that's great. And you can find that on the centerforconnection.org's page to give you just more support if you want more questions answered.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Tina. And for anybody who's interested in our call next Tuesday, we are doing these calls weekly. We're bringing it back to real estate next Tuesday, and we have Brad Inman from the Inman Group as our guest speaker. He'll be filling us in on all the latest and greatest on the real estate trends. So thank you, everybody, for being on the call today. Hope you have a wonderful day, and stay safe, stay healthy, stay soothed. Take care, guys.